Welcome to Talk Gnosis for January 15th, 2014. I'm Bishop Kenneth Canterbury, and as always, I'm being joined by my lovely co-host, Bishop Lainey Peterson. Hello, Lainey. How are you?
I am wonderful. How are you, Bishop Ken?
Good. I'm glad to see that you're feeling better. You were a little bit ill the last few days.
I was a little under the weather, but perking up. So thank you very much for your thoughts and prayers.
Good. Well, we've got a pretty exciting show tonight. Very honored to have our next guest on. If you want to make the introductions for him, because I know you guys have been friends for a very long time.
We have been. I want to introduce a very dear friend of mine, Professor Gregory Singleton. Dr. Singleton is the Professor of History Emeritus at Northeastern Illinois University. He's also a former clergyman and has been involved in the independent sacramental movement, as well as mainstream Protestant Christianity. And he is going to be talking to us tonight about an interesting thing that we in the Gnostic movement often encounter, and that is, are the distinctions between so-called esoteric and exoteric religion that different in American church history and American modern church practice? So welcome very much, Professor. We want to thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
So just to begin, we have these terms, esoteric and exoteric religions, and the interesting thing that I've encountered over the years is that I will hear scholars of religion and people who identify with esoteric movements use the term exoteric and esoteric. But when I hear from mainstream Christians, maybe lay people or people who haven't studied these issues, they'll use the term mainline and alternative, or a new religious movement or something like that, even though we might have two groups of people who are all using the name of Jesus and who may be practicing some very familiar traditions and sacraments. Do you think that this is a useful distinction that people are making?
It's a useful distinction if you're taking a look at what is the official position of a religious organization. The problem is that the official position is something that is usually held by very few people within the organization, in fact. Once upon a time, I used to spend a great deal of time going around the Chicago area giving adult forum programs at a variety of different churches. And one time, this was sometime in about 1974, I guess, I decided to accept a challenge from a Presbyterian pastor friend of mine. He said, I want you to come into my congregation, and frankly, I want you to find out what these people really know about official Presbyterian doctrine, because frankly, I haven't the slightest idea what they know. And I said, okay, great. And I came in and I did something that I turned into a traveling show. And I adapted it to Methodists and Episcopalians and Lutherans and Congregationalists and Baptists and so on. And I would go in and I would say, what is your understanding as a fill in the blank? What is your understanding of your church's basic doctrine? And I found out that the basic doctrine of pretty much every church in the United States, according to what the people in the pews are telling me, is be nice, don't fight. And when I started asking them questions about specific Presbyterian doctrine, I got looks of incredulity. What? Well, I don't know if I believe that. Furthermore, as I got further into it, I began to discover anew what I had run into a number of times as a kid in Alabama. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. But one of the things that I realized was that I was getting, people were saying things on the side that did not jive with what I was hearing from the pulpit. That did not particularly bother me because I didn't particularly like what I was hearing from the pulpit, to tell you the truth. One of the things that I came to understand is that, in point of fact, there are people in every religious organization who care deeply about the precision of doctrine. And these are the people who would eventually become the heresy seekers of any given religious organization.
Sure.
But in point of fact, I find that there's permeable membranes all over the place, and I've run into, both personally and in my research, a whole variety of sort of leakage
Okay.
from what are called in the mainstream sort of groups. Just two examples. One, which I discovered as a result of doing some research on Joseph René Vallot, a name probably known to all of you. And as you probably know, he was prepared for ordination on behalf of the See of Utrecht by Nashotah House Episcopal Seminary in Wisconsin. And he, for many years, was pastor of a parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin, that held membership in the council, it was a parish of the Council of Utrecht, the Union of Utrecht, rather. While at the same time, it was also an Episcopal parish.
Okay.
And as you know, he eventually sought consecration as a bishop, had to go all over the world, and you know that whole story. What is not well known, but what I have found in archives at Nashotah House and in the Diocese of Milwaukee, in the Diocese of Eau Claire, and in the Diocese of Fond du Lac, which are the three sort of Beretta Belt, as it's called, dioceses, I found all sorts of really interesting references which lead me to believe that there were all kinds of Anglo-Catholic clergy who were not quite certain that their ordination was valid, running off to Vallot after he had been consecrated in the middle of the night to have hands laid upon him, hands laid upon them. Now, this is something that, of course, is not going to show up in any official histories or Chamber of Commerce sort of histories of, say, the Episcopal Church. But it's rather interesting. There was this permeable membrane. The other one that I discovered just by happenstance when I was a student, when I was an undergraduate student in the Los Angeles area in the late 1950s, early 1960s. I earned my way, I paid my way, I should say, through my undergraduate education as the janitor. They call it a sexton, but I know a janitor when I see one, at an Episcopal church, an Anglo-Catholic Episcopal church, which is how I wound up in the Episcopal church. That's what happens when a Southern Baptist leaves Alabama and goes to California. And but eventually I was confirmed. I became a member of the parish. It was the parish of St. Mary of the Angels in Hollywood. And down the street, about a half a mile away, was a place called St. Albans Liberal Catholic Church. With Archbishop Matthews. And I decided, I asked my rector about it, and he said, well, rather than I tell you about it, why don't you go there and tell me what you think of it?
Wise.
And I thought that was fine, and I went, and I never became interested in becoming a member of the Liberal Catholic Church, but I attended many a divine liturgy there. And I got to know Bishop Matthews very well. And he once invited me to a seance. I thought, well, that's interesting.
That is.
And I went there, and there was a Presbyterian minister, a Baptist minister, a Methodist minister, a Unitarian clergy person. Well, the Unitarian clergy person, that didn't quite freak me out as much. What are these other guys doing with this guy, the liberal guy? Because, you know, when my rector said, what did you think of the Mass? I said, it's fascinating because if you close your ears and look at it, oh, here's a Tridentine rite.
Right.
If you close your eyes and listen to it, hey, it's Masonic, with a lot of theosophical language thrown in as well, which I found very, very interesting. But what was also very interesting, these other folk, the mainline folk at the seance deferred to Archbishop Matthews. They were treating him as a guru. Now, whether or not, I can only speculate about whether or not they said, they get together for their little clericus things, their pericope groups discussing the text for the next Sunday or something or other. I'm sort of doubting that they said, hey, you know what I did this last week?
Yeah.
I went to a seance.
I went to a seance, and the seance was hosted by this liberal Catholic bishop, and, most of the other people in the group would probably have said, the what Catholic?
Yeah.
And this sort of thing. But nevertheless, those are just two small examples of what I have discovered through both research and just personal experience in my 73 years on this orb, which is that the membranes are permeable. In point of fact, there's a lot of going back and forth. I mean, I'll never forget the time when in a Unitarian church, somebody came up to me and was showing me this diagram of Solomon's temple and how it's similar to the human body and on and on and on and on. And I knew that diagram. That diagram came from a Schofield Bible.
Yes. Yes.
You know the one I mean.
Yeah. And the interesting things is that I've looked at some old stuff from various Bible institutes done by missionaries, but that talk about the law of 7 octaves, which you will find in various esoteric teachings. So I think that there's, in fact, there has been somewhere along the line, there has been a membrane that has been penetrated or bridged at some point, and that when people might claim to be of a mainstream religious group, they may not be telling the whole story. They may have an official position. I'm sure those pastors, as you pointed out, were not standing up in the pulpit and saying, hey, guess what I did last weekend? But I bet you anything, there may have been times when they ran into some of their congregants at some of these events. It could very well be. I mean, I don't think that it's going to be, it's not that strange for somebody to go to a Methodist church on Sunday and then see a Reiki practitioner later on in the week.
Yes.
So, Bishop Ken, do you have any questions for Dr. Singleton?
Well, I mean, this has all been fascinating. I mean, I'm a little thrown off on our questions only because I've been enjoying listening to Professor Singleton's stories, and just to kind of, I think, kind of go over this one point is that I think, what he's talking about, kind of these membranes of kind of the church sometimes having openings in them. I do think that you see that, but I also think, though, there is a little bit of a distinction, at least that I see, especially in the Gnostic communities, of if you go into, like he says, maybe a Roman Catholic church, an Episcopalian church, a Methodist, and you ask people what they believe, well, you may get 100 different answers. I think that if you were going to any of the very specific Gnostic churches, whether it's, the Église Gnostique, whether it's the Oriental Church of Damkar, the Apostolic Johannite Church, and if you were to ask most of their members, most of their clergy, I think you may find very similar answers coming from their congregations of what they may, quote unquote, believe, only because I think there is a little bit more in depth, at least from my perspective, a little bit more in depth kind of awareness and kind of diving into the esoteric studies within these particular groups. Have you found that to be true, Professor, that people in kind of the independent movements or those involved in more esoteric or Gnostic movements tend to be a little bit more focused upon their studies than the mainstream religion?
I do see your point. I'm sort of thinking a yes and no here, or more precisely, I'm thinking, let's go with another variable. And that variable is size. The smaller the community, the more likely that there's going to be engagement, whether it's through formal study or informal conversation, that there's going to be more engagement that everybody's a part of.
Right.
And one of my all-time favorite and largely ignored American philosophers is Josiah Royce. And Royce was the founding chair of the Department of Philosophy at Harvard in the late 19th century. He wrote a very important piece of work that French scholars have recognized as important for a long time, and he's often ignored here in this country. He wrote an important piece of work in the very first decade of the 20th century entitled The Problem of Christianity. And so far as he was concerned, and I am vastly oversimplifying here, the problem with Christianity is that it has not realized its potential. And it hasn't realized its potential because its real potential lies in the idea of the collectivity of people being the body of Christ, taking that very, very seriously. And he has this marvelous, marvelous phrase that comes at the end of 383 pages of very careful argument. And his bottom line on that is, from one perspective, the world is a progressively realized community of interpretation. And that the whole point of church or any collectivity of people is for us to be in constant conversation with each other. Essentially, we are our own teachers and we are our own students. We learn from each other, we teach each other, and we are constantly evolving a perspective. And a lot that he says is very similar to some of the elements of the thought of Teilhard de Chardin when he talks about the omega point that we're going to, where Christ, the cosmic Christ, is our ultimate destination. It's a very, very similar idea here. And this requires that the groups that evolve to be engaged in this progressively realized community of interpretation be rather small.
Right.
What happens when you get larger and larger and larger is you can have little groups within that organization, or you can have a lot of people who fall between the cracks and feel no sense of community at all. I think to the extent that you actually have community, and I think smaller numbers enhance that possibility, then you're going to have more people kind of being on board. Now, the difference you would get is that, you know, in Royce's view, yes, each group is going to come up with a slightly different interpretation, and that's a good thing because that represents the experience of that group. So that Royce never used the term, but he would have been on board with the common term, tell your truth, or tell the truth of this group, as opposed to truth, big T, that we're going to determine here and lay upon you.
Gotcha.
So I think that size is a very important, you're talking about something very important.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
And the size is fostering community, which helps people to speak their truth, which may be happening, as Bishop Canterbury pointed out, in these Gnostic churches that tend to be rather small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one of the things that I see is that in most cases, congregations are on the smaller side. I've had, people ask me these questions, how big is your congregations? Well, I've seen congregations anywhere from 5, 20, 30, seldom more than 50 to 60 people in a congregation. But I think that it definitely gives a lot more interaction. I think, people tend to get together more frequently. They tend to socialize in many cases with these people, and it does give a great learning experience. And I think you kind of nailed everything right on the head with that analysis.
Yes, and Gnosis can give rise to Gnosis, I would say, in the sense that we if we're sharing, if we're truly sharing, there's something that comes together, and whether you want to call it an energy or you want to call it thoughts or however you want to define it, something is going to be produced when people are in communion with each other.
Well, there is something there that is demonstrably greater than the sum of the parts.
Yes.
Yes.
And that is not going to happen with large numbers. With large numbers, it is going to be programmed. Mm-hmm. Somebody or some small group is going to come up with the method or the message for a large group of people, and people either will say, yeah, sure, why not, without necessarily having a real buy-in. The small group really has a much better chance of people actually having a buy-in because they actually have a stake. They do have a dog in this race.
Yes.
Great points.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Professor Singleton. We need to move on to some of our news and wrap up. You've offered some wonderful stories and some great challenges for us. So thank you so much for being on the show. We hope you'll join us again sometime. I
would love to, and let me just give you a bibliographical lead. If you haven't read Harold Bloom's The American Religion, read it. Came out in 1992, a Yale professor. Essentially, he argued that the real operational day-to-day religion of the vast majority of Americans, no matter what their denomination, is indeed Gnosticism.
Wow.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Well, in news, I got some exciting news. As a member of the North American College of Gnostic Bishops, I am pleased to announce that we have re-elected His Grace, the Most Excellent Sean McCain, for another term as president of the North American College of Gnostic Bishops. I want to thank him for his dedication and commitment to the movement. It has been a long journey, and he has done a really great job. For any of those within the Gnostic community who are interested in either the work of the college, or if you want to learn how your church may join, and we do have various degrees of membership, from individual memberships to full church jurisdictions, make sure you come visit the website at www.nacgb.org. Any other news, my dear sister?
My brother, I think that is it for now.
Awesome. Again, I want to thank all of our viewers. We really appreciate your feedback. Last few shows, we've had some great feedback going back and forth on our YouTube channel. Make sure that you leave comments for us on YouTube. You can also email us at talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com. You can also visit our Facebook page at Talk Gnosis on Facebook. We really appreciate all of the feedback, all of your commentary, and we do try to get back on a timely manner for you. Coming up next week, another exciting show, Interfaith Work with John Moorhead.
Yes, it's going to be a great show. John Moorhead is an evangelical who has done a lot of work in the areas of apologetics, interfaith work, as well as interfaith diplomacy. So it should be a very interesting perspective about how people from different religious faiths can all manage to at least semi-get along on this rock that we're all living on. So it should be a really excellent show.
Really should be.
Yes, and as always, folks, this has been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends, click the like button, and subscribe to our channel. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the views of Gnostic NYC or any other organizations. No animals were harmed during the production of this show. For more Talk Gnosis, tune in every Wednesday for new episodes. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.